Imagine walking into a diner on a quiet morning. The smell of fresh coffee in the air, the sound of forks clinking against plates, and the usual chatter of regulars filling the room. Nothing unusual, nothing dramatic, just another day. But then, someone laughs. Not the joyful kind of laugh, but the cruel, mocking kind that makes the room freeze. All eyes turn toward a woman behind the counter. Her sleeves are rolled up, and for the first time, the scars she spent years hiding are visible. The laughter gets louder. A man, arrogant, smug, the type who thrives on tearing others down, points at her scars like they're some kind of joke. The diner shifts uncomfortably. Whispers ripple through the air. The woman swallows hard, her cheeks burning, but she doesn't back down. She stands there, silent, enduring the humiliation. But before anyone can intervene, someone else stands up, a man at the back of the diner. His face goes pale, not with disgust, but with recognition. His eyes lock on a tattoo just visible on the woman's arm, half hidden beneath the scars. His hands begin to tremble. That tattoo doesn't just mean something, it means everything. It belongs to a unit he once knew, a unit that saved his life nearly 2 decades ago. And suddenly, the laughter dies. Because this woman, mocked for her scars, dismissed as ordinary, is about to be revealed as a hero who carried the weight of life and death on her shoulders. And her story is going to change every single person in that diner forever. And if you want to hear how a simple breakfast turned into a moment of truth, of gratitude, and even redemption, stick with me, because this story is one you'll never forget. But before we dive in, take a quick second to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss out on stories of justice, karma, and unbelievable real-life twists just like this one. Now, let's get into it. The morning sun spilled through the dusty blinds of Mel's diner, painting long golden stripes across chipped vinyl booths and the worn linoleum floor. It was the kind of place where regulars came for bottomless coffee, where the same faces greeted you day after day, where gossip was served almost as generously as pancakes. At the back corner, Sarah Miller moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had repeated these motions 1,000 times. Coffee pot in hand, she refilled cups without being asked, wiped down tables with practiced ease, and offered polite nods to customers. Her uniform, though faded from countless washes, was always neat, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. To most people in town, she was just the scarred waitress at Mel's, a woman whose presence blended into the background, seen but rarely acknowledged beyond whispers and sidelong glances. And yet, there was no denying the stares. When Sarah leaned forward to pour coffee, the edge of her sleeve would sometimes slip back, revealing twisted scar tissue that crawled up her forearms. Jagged lines, ridges, and patches of discolored flesh made her skin look almost inhuman to those who didn't understand. Her face bore marks, too, a web of burn scars etched across her jaw and cheek, though she often tried to conceal them with makeup. But makeup couldn't erase what life had carved into her. Most days, she endured it in silence, a joke muttered under someone's breath, a smirk exchanged at her expense, the careless cruelty of those who had never known suffering. To Sarah, these were familiar enemies, unwelcome but predictable. She had long ago accepted that people feared and mocked what they didn't understand. But this morning, the tension in the diner was different. It started when a group of construction workers walked in, loud and brash, the kind who filled a room with their presence the second they saw I stepped through the door. Their leader was Chad Morrison, a man with expensive sunglasses perched carelessly on his head and the swagger of someone who thought he owned every space he entered. His company logo stretched across the back of his shirt, Branson Construction, as if the name itself demanded respect. Chad ordered like he was issuing commands rather than requests, snapping his fingers at Sarah when he wanted more coffee, barking for extra bacon as if she were his servant rather than a server. His friends laughed along, emboldened by his arrogance, filling the diner with their obnoxious banter. But when Chad's eyes landed on Sarah's scars, the atmosphere shifted from arrogance to cruelty. He nudged one of his crew and sneered loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Hey, look at this! Freddy Krueger's serving us breakfast. Careful, boys, she might scare the eggs right off the plate." The table erupted in laughter. Not nervous laughter, Not the kind meant to brush off an awkward comment, but harsh, mean-spirited cackling meant to wound. Sarah froze for a moment, the coffee pot trembling slightly in her hand. She didn't speak, didn't lash out, didn't defend herself. Instead, she pressed her lips into a thin line and carried on, silently enduring the humiliation. One of the workers tossed a couple of crumpled dollar bills on the floor, sneering as he said, "Here, sweetheart, buy yourself some scar cream. Might do you some good." The sound of laughter bounced off the diner's walls, and for a moment it seemed as though the cruelty would go unanswered. Sarah bent slightly, reaching to pick up the bills, her face tight with shame, her scars suddenly feeling heavier, more visible than ever. But then, something shifted. A man sitting 2 booths over had been watching, his expression darkening with every word Chad spat out. He wasn't just a random patron, his bearing was unmistakable. Shoulders squared, posture rigid, his every movement precise even in stillness. His name was Michael, though few here knew that. To the casual observer, he looked like any other middle-aged man grabbing breakfast before work. But there was a steel in his eyes, the kind of steel only forged in places where survival wasn't guaranteed. And when Chad Morrison's laughter reached its peak, Michael slowly set down his fork. The scrape of metal against porcelain cut through the noise. He turned his head, his gaze locking onto Chad with an intensity that silenced even those still chuckling. "Say that again," Michael said, his voice calm but edged with something dangerous. The diner went quiet, the weight of his tone heavier than any shout. Chad smirked, unbothered. "What, about Freddy Krueger here? Lighten up, man. Just a joke." Michael stood, and suddenly his presence filled the entire room. Taller than most, his frame carried the quiet strength of someone who had spent years honing his body. But it wasn't his size that made people take notice. It was the gravity of his composure, the kind that said he'd been in worse confrontations than this, and he had always walked away the one still standing. "You think scars make someone a monster?" Michael asked, his voice low and deliberate. "Then maybe you don't understand what those scars mean." The air thickened. Customers leaned in, sensing something far greater was unfolding than a spat between strangers. Sarah's hand tightened around the coffee pot, her heart racing as she realized this man wasn't mocking her. He was defending her. And for the first time in years, the shame in her chest flickered into something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Michael's words hung in the air, heavy enough to choke the laughter out of Chad's crew. For the first time that morning, Chad's smug expression faltered. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in front of an audience. The diner had fallen silent, forks frozen mid-bite, coffee cups hovering inches from lips. Even the old jukebox in the corner seemed to hush, its humming background static no match for the charged atmosphere. Chad recovered quickly, puffing out his chest and flashing his trademark smirk. "Scars mean what? That she couldn't handle the fire? Don't tell me you're one of those white knight types. Relax, pal. She's used to it. Look at her. She's been hiding those things her whole life." The words landed like a slap, but Sarah didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. She'd survived worse. What unsettled her wasn't Chad's cruelty. It was the stranger standing up for her. For years, she'd shouldered her scars alone, telling herself she didn't need anyone to fight her battles. Yet here was this man, eyes sharp as a blade, refusing to let the insult pass. Michael stepped closer to Chad's table, his boots thudding against the linoleum with deliberate weight. "You think you're funny. You think tearing someone down makes you strong." His gaze dropped to Sarah's scars, then lifted again, his jaw tight. "But those marks, they're not weakness. They're proof." Chad leaned back in his seat, folding his arms with forced nonchalance. "Proof of what? That she lost? Come on, tough guy, enlighten us." Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a battered leather wallet. From inside, he withdrew a faded photograph, creased, worn from years of being carried too close to the heart. He laid it on the table in front of Chad with a deliberate motion. The photo showed a much younger Michael, clad in military fatigues, flanked by a squad of soldiers in dusty combat gear. Behind them stretched the bleak backdrop of a desert outpost. On Michael's arm, clearly visible beneath rolled-up sleeves, was a tattoo, an eagle clutching arrows, the insignia of his unit. "You see this?" Michael tapped the photo with a calloused finger. "Every man in this picture carried scars. Inside, outside, didn't matter. We earned them. They weren't shame, they were survival. And the woman you just mocked, his eyes flicked to Sarah, was there. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The coffee pot nearly slipped from her hand. She hadn't heard those words in nearly 2 decades. Words that dragged her back to sandstorms, gunfire, and the cries of brothers in arms. Michael turned then, his voice softening but no less intense. 18 years ago, in Kandahar province, our convoy got ambushed. I was bleeding out, thought I wouldn't make it back home to meet my newborn daughter. And then he pointed at Sarah, pulled me out of that burning vehicle with her own hands. Gasps rippled through the diner. Heads swiveled from Michael to Sarah, eyes wide with disbelief. The scars she had spent years hiding suddenly glowed with new meaning in their minds. They weren't grotesque. They were a battlefield signature, the cost of saving lives. But Sarah stood frozen, her world tilting beneath her feet. She remembered that convoy. She remembered the fire, the chaos, the searing pain as flames licked her arms. And she remembered dragging someone out, but she had buried those memories deep, too painful to revisit. Michael's voice cracked as he continued, the weight of memory pulling at his composure. I've looked for you for almost 2 decades. All I knew was that a woman with burns saved me when everyone else was falling. I thought maybe it was just a ghost story, I told myself in the dark. But seeing that tattoo, he gestured toward the faint ink barely visible beneath Sarah's sleeve. I knew. Sarah's hand unconsciously brushed the edge of her uniform, where the faded unit insignia lay inked on her skin. A tattoo she had never removed, though she'd kept it hidden for years. Chad's smirk had vanished completely. His crew shifted uncomfortably in their seats, suddenly unsure of the man they'd followed so easily in laughter. One muttered, "Holy hell," under his breath, as the truth began to sink in. The diner's silence was different now. It wasn't thick with tension, it was reverent. Every eye was on Sarah, not with ridicule, but with dawning respect. And for the first time in years, Sarah's scars didn't feel like chains. They felt like proof. Sarah's knees threatened to buckle beneath her, the pot of coffee in her hand trembling so hard she had to set it down on the nearest table before it shattered. She wanted to run, to vanish into the kitchen and slam the door behind her. For 3 years she had endured the whispers, the stares, the sideways glances, because it was easier to let people assume the worst than to force them to confront the truth. But now, the truth was standing in the middle of Mel's diner, speaking it aloud for everyone to hear. Michael's eyes never left her, steady and sure, like a lighthouse cutting through fog. It's you, isn't it? Sergeant Sarah Miller, 3rd Infantry Division. His voice cracked over the rank, thick with the weight of recognition. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. It felt like every memory she had worked so hard to bury had clawed its way back to the surface. The acrid smoke, the screams, the heat of metal searing her flesh as she pushed another soldier out of the wreckage, and the second blast, the second blast that had turned the night into a living inferno. "Stop," Sarah whispered, but the word was barely audible, lost beneath the thundering of her own pulse in her ears. Michael stepped closer, pulling the photo back from Chad's table as if it didn't deserve to rest near him. 18 years, he said, softer now, almost pleading. 18 years I've carried this guilt, wondering if you survived, if you made it home. I owe you my life. My girls owe you their father. The weight of his words crushed Sarah's carefully built walls. She turned away, gripping the counter for balance, her scarred hands visible now in the full light of morning. Customers who had once averted their gaze now stared openly, not with disgust, but with shock, with shame, with dawning respect. Chad scoffed, though it lacked the confidence it once carried. "Oh, come on. You expect us to believe this sob story, that she's some kind of war hero? Look at her." His laugh was forced, desperate, but the silence that followed left him standing alone. Not a single chuckle from his crew, not a murmur of agreement from the room. Even Bob Hutchinson, the gruff owner behind the counter who had never been known for kindness, slammed a coffee mug down hard enough to crack it. "That's enough, Morrison." His voice was low, dangerous, cutting through the diner like a blade. "Sit down or get out." For once, Chad faltered. His crew shifted uncomfortably, exchanging uneasy glances. The power dynamic had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The predator had been declawed. Sarah's breathing was uneven, her chest rising and falling too fast. She wanted to deny it, to bury the truth again, but when her eyes met Michael's, she saw not pity, not curiosity, but something she hadn't seen in a long time: recognition. "I tried to save everyone," she said suddenly, the words ripping free before she could stop them. Her voice was rough, scraped raw from years of silence. "But I couldn't. Thompson, Rodriguez." Her throat closed around the names. "I wasn't fast enough, not strong enough." Michael's eyes filled with something that broke her, gratitude and grief braided together. He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "You saved me. That was enough." A hush fell so deep that even the hiss of the coffee machine seemed to fade. Every patron, every employee, even Chad's hangers-on, sat suspended in that moment. Sarah realized then that the secret she had hidden for 18 years was no longer hers to keep. The scars were no longer just hers to bear. They were proof of survival, proof of sacrifice, proof of who she really was. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if that was a curse or a gift. The silence inside Mel's diner was suffocating, so heavy that Sarah could hear the faint tick of the clock above the door. Every pair of eyes bore into her, some wide with awe, some with shame, and others struggling to reconcile the woman they had mocked for years with the soldier Michael had named aloud. Her hands trembled as she pulled her sleeves back down, hiding the tattoo, hiding the scars, though it was too late. The truth had already escaped. Michael took a step closer, his voice steadier now. "I remember the night. I remember the fire, the heat, the blast. But more than anything, I remember you. You pulled me out when I was trapped. I should have died in that Humvee. But you—" His voice caught, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "You carried me through hell itself." Sarah's throat tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to stop, to shut up before the walls she had built came crashing down completely. Yet the words wouldn't come. Chad shifted in his seat, scoffing, but it sounded weaker now. "So what? She's still just some waitress hiding her freak show under long sleeves. You all think she's some hero because she's go." A couple ugly scars. This time, no laughter followed. His crew didn't even look at him. One stared at the table, suddenly fascinated by the scratches in the formica. Another rubbed the back of his neck, uncomfortable, like a kid caught doing something shameful. Bob Hutchinson finally spoke, his voice gravelly but steady. "I've seen a lot of folks come through this diner. Farmers, factory workers, truckers, cops. Never realized I had a soldier serving coffee every morning." His gaze softened, just for a moment, as it landed on Sarah. "That's on me." The weight of his words pressed on Sarah's chest. For 3 years, she had blended into the background, tolerated as long as she kept her head down and worked. No one had asked. No one had cared. Now they all knew, and the shift in the room was unmistakable. Michael gently reached into his jacket and pulled out the worn photograph, the one that had haunted him for nearly 2 decades. He placed it on the counter where Sarah could see. "That's us," he said softly. Her eyes locked on the faded image. There he was, Michael Kelly, impossibly young, full of energy and pride in his uniform. And there she was, standing at his shoulder, smiling in the desert sun. For a moment, she forgot the diner, forgot the stairs, forgot Chad's sneer. It was just her and that photo, a reminder that once upon a time, she had been someone else, someone whole. Her knees buckled, and she gripped the counter harder, the photograph blurring through her tears. "I thought you were dead," she whispered, her voice breaking. Michael's face softened, his jaw trembling as he spoke. "And I thought you were. But I lived, Sarah, because of you. 18 years I've searched for the woman who saved my life, and I finally found her, in a diner, serving coffee to people who don't deserve you." The room held its breath. Even the clatter of dishes from the kitchen had stilled as the entire building leaned in to hear her response. For the first time in years, Sarah realized she wasn't invisible. She wasn't a monster, wasn't just a scarred waitress at Mel's diner. She was Sergeant Sarah Miller, and she could no longer hide. Chad's laugh came out brittle, like glass about to shatter. He leaned back in his seat, trying to reclaim the swagger that was slipping through his fingers. "Oh, give me a break. You expect us to believe that? What, this scarred-up waitress is some kind of war hero now? Please." If she was really all that, she wouldn't be slinging hash in some greasy spoon. A ripple of discomfort passed through the diner. Even Chad's crew flinched at his words, but he was too wrapped up in his own arrogance to notice. He smirked, doubling down, his voice louder now, desperate to pull the attention back to himself. Yeah, I said it. You're all acting like she's some savior, but look at her. She's broken. If she was really that tough, she wouldn't be hiding here, living like a nobody. Before anyone could react, Michael moved. He didn't shout, didn't lunge, didn't even raise his hand. He simply stood taller, his presence filling the room in a way that silenced every mutter, every shuffle of feet. His eyes locked onto Chad, and his voice, when it came, was calm, but it carried the weight of thunder. Before you make this worse for yourself. The words sliced through the air, sharp and final. For a heartbeat, the diner froze. Even Chad blinked, caught off guard by the intensity. But arrogance was a stubborn disease, and instead of shutting up, he sneered. What are you gonna do, old man? Give me a lecture? Michael's expression changed. It was subtle, a shift of his jaw, the hardening of his gaze, but it was enough. In that moment, anyone who had ever served recognized it. He wasn't just Michael Kelly, father of two, survivor of a roadside bomb. He was Sergeant Kelly, combat veteran, a man who had carried death on his shoulders and walked through fire. And Chad? Chad was about to be annihilated without a single punch thrown. Michael's voice dropped, deliberate and controlled, each word a strike aimed not at Chad's body, but at his very soul. You dare, he began, his tone low and lethal, to stand there in your comfortable life, with your intact body and your ignorant mouth, and question her worth? You want to know who she is? You want to know the story behind those scars you mocked? The diner went silent. Forks froze halfway to mouths. Even the hum of the ceiling fan seemed to fade, leaving only Michael's words. His eyes swept across the room, ensuring everyone was listening, because what came next wasn't just for Chad. It was for all of them. He inhaled once, deeply, as though summoning the past, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of memory, of pain, of truth forged in fire. July 15, 2006, Ramadi, Iraq. 120 degrees in the shade, except there was no shade, just sun, sand, and death waiting at every corner. The crowd leaned in as his words painted a battlefield none of them could ever truly imagine. But Sarah? Sarah knew exactly where he was taking them. She felt her stomach twist, her body trembling as memories she had buried deep clawed their way to the surface. And still, Michael's story had only just begun. Michael's tone shifted as he spoke, drawing the room into his memory, as if the diner itself had been transported into that sweltering desert. His voice was steady, but his eyes were far away, staring at ghosts only he could see. Our convoy was returning from patrol, routine, or so we thought. 3 Humvees, 12 soldiers. We were tired, bone tired. All we wanted was to get back to base, choke down whatever passed for dinner, and crash for a few hours before doing it all over again. He paused, his hand unconsciously resting on his chest, fingertips brushing the scars hidden beneath his shirt. Then the world exploded. The words hit, harder than any shout could have. Michael's voice dipped lower, forcing the diner to lean closer to catch every syllable. An IED buried under the road, it hit the lead vehicle, my vehicle, with enough force to flip a 9,000-pound Humvee like it was a child's toy. The blast tore through steel like paper. The air in the diner felt heavy, thick with heat that wasn't really there. Sarah's hand tightened around the counter edge, knuckles white as Michael continued. Rodriguez was driving. 22 years old, from El Paso. Good kid. Always had a grin, always talked about the girl he was going to propose to when we got home. The blast killed him instantly. Or at least, that's what we told ourselves. The alternative, that he suffered in those flames, was something we couldn't bear to believe. A murmur swept through the crowd, grief for a young man they had never met. Michael's jaw tightened before he pressed on. Thompson was in the back, head wound, unconscious, bleeding out. Maybe he would have made it if we got him help fast enough. But me? I was trapped. The blast warped the doorframe like twisted metal art. I couldn't move, couldn't get out. And the fire. The fire was spreading fast from the ruptured fuel tank, eating its way toward me like a living thing hungry for flesh. His voice sharpened, suddenly aimed directly at Chad. You ever seen a vehicle burn from the inside? Felt your skin start to blister while you're still conscious? Smelled your own flesh cooking, knowing you're about to die, and there's nothing you can do but scream and pray it's quick? The question hung in the air like smoke. Chad shifted uncomfortably, but Michael didn't let up. That was me. That was my reality. And then his gaze softened, turning toward Sarah. She appeared. The entire diner followed his eyes. Sarah, trembling, blinked back tears, her scars burning with remember. Ed Heat. Sergeant Sarah Miller, Michael said, his voice taking on a reverence that made the room feel like a church. Our unit's medic. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was ordered to stay back with the wounded, but when her people were in danger, Sarah never followed that order. Every word hit like a drumbeat, weaving a story that was part memory, part miracle. She ran into those flames. No hesitation, no thought for herself, nothing but determination. She had no tools, no gear that mattered, just her bare hands and a combat knife. And somehow, by sheer will, she ripped open that Humvee window and dragged me out. 200 pounds of soldier and gear, through fire, through shrapnel, while her skin was already burning. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he spoke, his body reliving the weight of being pulled to safety. And she didn't stop there. She went back for Thompson. Everyone else would have said it was too late. The fire had spread, ammunition was cooking off, rounds exploding like fireworks in every direction. But she went back. He stopped, his voice catching. When he spoke again, it was barely above a whisper, but it carried more power than before. That's when the second IED detonated. The diner was silent, every breath suspended as Michael's words carved through the air. The hum of the neon sign outside and the faint hiss from the griddle in the kitchen were the only sounds that dared exist in that heavy moment. Even Chad, who only minutes earlier had strutted in like he owned the place, now looked like a man who wanted to shrink into nothing. Michael's voice dropped into a low rasp, like gravel dragged across metal. That second blast. It ripped through what was left of the convoy. Shrapnel flew in every direction. I felt the impact in my leg, felt my head slam against the dirt. But through the smoke, through the ringing in my ears, I saw her. He nodded, dead towards Sarah. She was on top of me, shielding me, her body, her hands. She took the brunt of it, burns, shrapnel, broken bones. She didn't think twice. She just threw herself over me like my life mattered more than hers. A shudder rippled through the room. Forks rested untouched on plates. Coffee cups cooled untouched on the tables. The usual clatter of the diner had vanished into reverent stillness. Michael's jaw tightened as he fought back a tremor in his voice. Do you know what it's like, Chad? To open your eyes and see someone lying half dead on top of you, blood running down their face, skin burned away, still trying to drag you to safety with what little strength they had left? That's who you mocked today. That's who you shoved like trash. A soldier who bled for this country while you were probably sitting at home complaining about a bad Wi-Fi signal. The blow landed, harder than a punch. Chad shifted, his bravado leaking away like air from a punctured tire. His crew, who had once laughed at his every cruel word, now sat pale and rigid, unable to meet Sarah's eyes. Michael's gaze swept the diner again, ensuring every person was with him. And let me tell you something else. Those scars you sneered at, they're not marks of shame. They're proof. Proof that she stood in hell, walked through fire, and came back carrying the lives of her brothers in arms. Every scar on her skin is a story written in pain and courage. And if you had even half her strength, you'd spend every day of your life trying to be worthy of a fraction of what she's endured. Sarah's breath caught. She wanted to speak, to stop him, to shrink back into the shadows as she always had. But she couldn't. His words held her in place, pinning her beneath the weight of truth she had tried so hard to hide. Michael leaned forward, his voice sharp as a blade. So, Chad, tell me again, what exactly have you done with your life that makes you feel entitled to laugh at hers? The question detonated like a third bomb, though this time no one was caught in the blast but Chad Morrison. For the first time that morning, the man who had entered with swagger and arrogance sat utterly silent, his face pale, his hands trembling just enough for everyone to notice. The diner waited, every eye fixed on him, demanding an answer. Chad's lips parted, but no sound came out. His throat worked as if trying to force words past the knot lodged there, yet nothing emerged. For once, the man who always had a snide remark, always had a cruel comeback, found himself stripped bare of language. The silence pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating. His so-called friends shifted uncomfortably at their booth, their eyes darting between him, Michael, and Sarah, as though they were trapped in a courtroom and waiting for the verdict. Nobody dared to laugh now. Nobody dared to move. Michael, sensing the perfect moment, didn't ease up. He leaned forward, his voice calm but unrelenting. You think toughness is about swagger? About belittling someone who already carries more weight than you could shoulder in a lifetime? Toughness, he said, his eyes burning into Chad's, is running into fire when every instinct tells you to run the other way. Toughness is bleeding out in a desert thousands of miles from home and still holding the hand of the soldier next to you so they don't die afraid. Toughness is waking up every day with scars that remind you of everything you've lost, and still finding the strength to smile and serve coffee to people who don't even know your name. Sarah's hands shook slightly at the counter, the coffee pot she held trembling in her grasp. She wasn't used to hearing her pain spoken aloud, let alone painted into something noble. Part of her wanted to melt into the floor. Another part wanted to cry. Chad shifted in his seat. His face was flushed now, not with confidence but with shame. He stared at the floor, the cocky tilt of his jaw gone, the smirk erased. His friends looked at him like strangers, the unspoken question hanging between them. Is this really the man we followed? Michael's voice softened then, but the steel never left it. And you, with your smooth skin and easy life, you mocked her for scars you could never understand. Do you even realize how small that makes you look? You thought you were laughing at her, but you were only showing the world who you are. The diner was so quiet that the hum of the fridge behind the counter sounded like a roar. A single cough from one of the patrons echoed like a gunshot. Every pair of eyes stayed locked on Chad. Finally, Michael straightened, giving the man the mercy of silence. It was Sarah who broke it. Her voice was soft but steady, every word deliberate. I didn't ask for anyone's pity. I didn't ask for applause. I just wanted to live, to do my job, to save as many as I could. She turned her gaze to Chad, her eyes wet but unblinking. But I will never apologize for my scars. Not to you. Not to anyone. The words weren't shouted, but they cut through the room sharper than any yell could have. Chad swallowed hard. His hands fidgeted on the table. And for the first time in memory, Chad Morrison, the bully, the self-proclaimed king of bravado, looked very, very small. The silence that stretched inside Mel's diner was not the comfortable kind. It wasn't the soft hush of morning before coffee, or the brief pause when everyone's mouths are too full of pancakes to speak. No, this silence was suffocating, a blanket of judgment laid across Chad Morrison's shoulders, pressing down harder with every passing heartbeat. Chad had always lived in noise, his own laughter, the sycophantic chuckles of his entourage, the buzz of admiration that came from being the loudest voice in the room. But now, nothing, just stillness, the kind that exposes weakness and leaves no shadows to hide in. His friends at the booth fidgeted like children caught cheating on a test, their loyalty dissolving under the heat of the stares pinning them in place. Michael Kelly didn't move. He stood like a sentinel, his presence filling the space without effort. His hands were steady, his shoulders squared, and his voice, when he finally spoke again, was calm enough to chill bone. Do you feel it, Chad? Michael's gaze never wavered. That weight pressing down on you? That's the weight of truth. You've been walking around this town thinking you were untouchable, that you could build yourself up by tearing others down. But this, he gestured toward Sarah, toward the scars that had been mocked so cruelly just minutes earlier. This is what real strength looks like. Not cruelty, not arrogance, not the cheap high you get from humiliating someone who never deserved it. Strength is survival. Strength is sacrifice. Strength is knowing pain and still showing up anyway. Chad's lips moved, but the words caught in his throat. His usual arsenal of insults, ready-made barbs he'd relied on for years, seemed suddenly hollow, like toy weapons against real steel. He wanted to laugh, to sneer, to brush it off with that same swagger that had carried him through every confrontation since high school. But his laugh would have bounced back at him, exposed as the brittle mask it always was. The crowd wasn't on his side anymore. He could feel it in the air, the way people leaned forward in their seats, the way every eye held him accountable. Strangers who had once been invisible to him now bore down like a jury, their collective silence a verdict before the trial was even over. One of his so-called friends shifted in the booth. Eric, tall and lanky, who had been Chad's shadow since middle school, cleared his throat as if to speak. But when Chad turned his head, desperate for backup, Eric looked away, his jaw tightening. The betrayal wasn't in words but in absence, the absence of support, of loyalty, of blind agreement. The king had been dethroned, and his knights were abandoning him one by one. Sarah's hands, still trembling slightly from holding the coffee pot, finally set it down. She straightened, her chin lifting, as though Michael's words had unlocked something she had kept hidden for years. Her scars, once covered, now bared beneath the diner's fluorescent lights, glistened faintly as though reminding the world of their permanence. She didn't need to hide anymore. Not here, not now. She stepped closer, closing the gap between herself and Chad. The movement made him flinch ever so slightly, as though she were the one holding power now. And she was. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the diner with absolute clarity. "You wanted me to feel small," she said. "You wanted my scars to shame me. But do you know what they really are, Chad? They're proof. Proof that I lived when others didn't. Proof that I stood in the fire and came out the other side. Proof that I was strong enough to carry pain you'll never even begin to understand." Her eyes didn't leave his. "You mocked me because you thought my scars made me weak. But they're the strongest part of me." The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. They sank into the room, reverberating in the silence like thunder that rolled on long after the lightning had flashed. A murmur rippled through the crowd, soft but unmistakable. Heads nodded. Someone whispered, "Damn right." Another voice said, "She's a hero." The applause hadn't come yet, but it hovered there, waiting, like dry wood ready to catch fire. Chad looked down, his bravado shriveled to nothing. His reflection glared back at him in the chrome napkin holder on the table, a face red with shame, eyes wide with something unfamiliar. Fear. Not fear of Michael's fists, not fear of physical retribution, but fear of what he had become when stripped of his mask. For the first time, he had to see himself the way others saw him, a small man who had tried to tower over giants. Michael stepped back, his job done for the moment. He had delivered the blow, and now the truth was doing the rest. His gaze softened as it drifted toward Sarah, silently acknowledging her courage. Bob Hutchinson, the diner's owner, finally broke the silence, his voice gruff but tinged with something close to reverence. "Sarah," he said, his throat working, "3 years you've worked here, and I never knew. That's on me." Sarah blinked, startled by the unexpected turn, but Bob wasn't finished. He turned to the room, his chest rising and falling as he gathered strength. "This diner has always honored those who serve, always will, and anyone who can't respect that," his gaze cut toward Chad, sharp as glass, "well, they know where the door is." The murmur grew louder now, the tide of support swelling until the sound of clapping broke out. First one pair of hands, then another, then the entire diner erupted in applause. It wasn't polite clapping, it was thunderous, raw, cathartic. The kind of applause that didn't just honor someone, but demanded the world take notice. Chad, drowning in the noise, sat frozen. His friends shifted uncomfortably, their eyes glued to the table. Slowly, one by one, they slid out of the booth, distancing themselves from him as if shame were contagious. By the time the applause faded, Chad was sitting alone, abandoned by the very people who had once worshipped his every word. And that was when it hit him. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room anymore. He wasn't anything at all. The applause faded slowly, like waves receding after a storm, but its echo clung to the walls of Mel's diner. For Sarah, it felt unreal, like she had stepped into someone else's life, someone braver, someone whole. For years, she had hidden behind long sleeves and silence, hoping the world wouldn't notice her scars. Now those same scars were the reason an entire room of people stood united around her. Chad Morrison sat hunched at the booth, his bravado stripped bare. The man who had swaggered through the diner just 30 minutes ago looked like a shell, abandoned by his friends, his phone buzzing relentlessly with notifications he dared not check. Each vibration was another nail in the coffin of his reputation. Videos, photos, whispers spreading like wildfire through town. His empire of shallow admiration had collapsed in the span of a single morning. He stood, wobbling slightly as though the weight of shame had weakened his legs. For a fleeting moment, his eyes flicked toward Sarah, searching for something, anger maybe, or triumph. But Sarah wasn't gloating. She wasn't even looking at him. Her gaze was locked on Michael, and the look in her eyes told a story deeper than words ever could. Michael stepped forward, his movements unhurried but deliberate, as though each step carried the gravity of years. When he reached Sarah, he didn't hesitate. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into an embrace that wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. Recognition of pain, of sacrifice, of lives changed forever by choices and circumstances they couldn't undo. "You saved me," Michael said, his voice thick. "You saved my daughters. I've searched 18 years for this moment, to tell you that their laughter, their futures, all of it exists because of you." His words cracked on the edges, but he didn't hide it. The diner, silent once more, leaned into the rawness of the moment. Tears slid down Sarah's face, not of weakness, but of release. "I couldn't save them all," she whispered, her voice breaking on names she had carried like stones in her chest for nearly 2 decades. "Rodriguez, Thompson, I tried. God, I tried." Michael pulled her tighter. "You saved who you could. That's everything. Don't you ever think it wasn't enough." His words weren't just comfort, they were absolution. The absolution she had never allowed herself to believe she deserved. The diner erupted in applause again, louder this time, almost deafening. Strangers clapped until their palms burned, their faces wet with tears they hadn't expected to shed over a cup of coffee. Even Chad's abandoned friends clapped hesitantly, as if realizing for the first time what real respect looked like. Bob Hutchinson, who had been silent for too long, finally found his voice. He cleared his throat, his usually stern demeanor cracking under the weight of what he had witnessed. "Sarah," he said, stepping forward, 3 years you've worked here, and I never knew. That's my failure." He paused, collecting himself. "Effective immediately, you're promoted to shift manager. 30% raise, and you don't hide those scars anymore. Anyone who has a problem with them." His gaze swept the room, hard as stone. "Has a problem with me." The applause thundered again, rattling the very windows. Sarah, overwhelmed, could only nod, her lips trembling into a small but genuine smile. Chad, realizing he had no place here anymore, shuffled toward the door. He paused at the threshold, and he perhaps searching for one last word, one final defense. But the glares that met him, cold, sharp, unrelenting, killed whatever excuse he might have mustered. He stepped outside, the bell above the door jingling faintly, a pitiful sound compared to the roar behind him. 6 months later, Mel's diner looked the same, yet everything had changed. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee still filled the air. The bell still chimed with every customer. But now, the wall behind the counter bore a new display, a framed photo of Sergeant Sarah Miller in full combat gear, her name etched into a placard beneath it. "Our hero." Alongside it hung photos of other local veterans, their sacrifices honored in the place that had once been just another job for Sarah. She stood behind the counter in her manager's uniform, her scars uncovered, her posture straighter than ever. The fear of stares was gone. In its place was pride. Customers who once might have whispered now greeted her with warmth and respect. The bell chimed again one morning, and a familiar figure stepped inside. Chad Morrison. Gone was the polished arrogance. His designer clothes were replaced by a plain work shirt, volunteer badges from the Veterans Center pinned proudly to his chest. His once manicured hands bore calluses, the honest marks of physical labor. Even his walk was different. No swagger, no pretense, just humility. "I know I'm not welcome," Chad began, his voice quiet, careful. He placed an envelope on the counter. "But I needed to deliver this myself, $5,000, fundraising for the Veterans Center. I've been volunteering there for 4 months. It's not enough, but maybe it's a start." The diner fell silent, but not with hostility this time. People watched, wary but curious. Sarah studied him. This wasn't the same man who had tried to tear her down. This was someone broken, someone rebuilding brick by brick. Everyone deserves a second chance, Sarah said softly. That's what service taught me. Sometimes you save people who wouldn't save you. That's what makes us human. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was grace. Enough grace to open a door to redemption if Chad truly wanted it. He nodded, his eyes damp, and turned to leave. Chad? Sarah called out. He stopped. The Veterans Center always needs volunteers. Keep showing up. For the first time in years, Chad's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. He nodded again and walked out into the sunlight, the diner bell chiming softly behind him. Sarah exhaled, her chest light in a way it hadn't been for 18 years. Her scars hadn't disappeared, but now they no longer defined her shame. They defined her strength, and the town would never forget it.